Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff DeWitt. I'm a member of the Oregon think tank. On behalf of the University Housing, I welcome all of you and thank you for attending tonight's community conversation panel titled Green Collar Jobs Towards the New Economy. Tonight's community conversation series is part of a living learning initiative by University Housing. And the panel discussions are co-produced by the students and student staff of the Oregon Think Tank and Oregon Brain Trust. Two undergraduate academic groups in the residence halls. Tonight's panel was conceived by students of the Oregon Think Tank who meet weekly on Tuesdays at 5:30 in the Collier Lounge of the Hamilton Residence Hall complex. We'd like to invite students who are interested in contributing to the development of the community conversations series to join this group, or simply just drop in and suggest a panel if you're interested in one for us to do. We always welcome new ideas and we value your critical thinking and intellectual feedback. We also wish to acknowledge our co-sponsors, the Robert T. Clark Honors College, the Oregon Humanities Center, and Undergraduate Studies, who have collaborated with Oregon Housing for the past 6 years to make this series possible. Finally, we have comment cards available for you, and we would value your feedback about tonight's panel. So if you'd please take one and take the moment to complete, that would be great. Our panel will conclude tonight at 9 p.m., and we reserve the last 30 minutes or so for open questions from the audience. At this time, I'll introduce the panel and special guests. First of all, I'm going to start with our library partner, Dean Walton. He wasn't able to make tonight, but he completed a bibliography, and that bibliography is online at the Community Conversations page on the library's webpage if you're interested in viewing that. First of all, Steve Mital, Director of the Universities of Oregon's Office of Sustainability. He will serve as our moderator this evening and will offer some opening comments for the panel discussion. Second, Dr. Greg Bothun is a professor of the university's Department of Physics. Joshua Skov is a principal at a Good Company, a sustainability consulting firm based in Eugene, and teaches as an adjunct instructor in the Department of Planning, Public Policy, and Management at the University of Oregon. Dr. Ryan Herzog teaches an adjunct instructor for the Department of Economics and as an adjunct instructor for finance in finance with Lundquist College of Business. Marcus Widenor is an associate professor with the university's Labor Education and Research Center, or LERC. Robert Ebbage directs the Northwest Energy Education Institute at Lane Community College and teaches in the Energy Management Technician program. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve.
Well, thank you very much. So first I want to say thanks to Kevin Hatfield and the students from the Oregon Brain Trust and the Oregon Think Tank. I really appreciate the fact that you took the time to organize and publicize the event. It's a really timely topic. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions before I turn it over to each of the five panelists to take some time and share their perspectives. So really just asking for a show of hands. How many of you are planning to graduate, let's say, in the next 2 years? So that's half or more. And how many of you, of those folks who raise your hands, are nervous about your job prospects? Yeah, well, right, you should be, right? I mean, it's an unfortunate, because the bad news, of course, is that we're in one of the worst recessions that we've had right in the last 100 years. But the good news, and there is good news, is that there's a reason to expect that when the economy comes back, right, that the green economy will really take off with a roar, and that we'll see huge investment and growth in that sector. So tonight, I hope we can talk about what that green economy might look like when the economy does come back. Hopefully it'll coincide with your graduations. How to prepare yourselves to be competitive in the race to get the jobs that green economy has to offer. So let me start by sharing just a few observations, and then I'll pass it off to Greg Bothun, who's going to give sort of a big picture overview of what this green jobs opportunities, what the space might look like, and then we'll move on down to some of the other panelists to share their perspectives. And I hope to have a good 30 minutes at the end of the panelists' presentations to entertain your questions and have a really meaty and robust discussion. I think that's probably going to be the most interesting part. So I really look forward to that. So anyways, a few observations. The new economy is certainly going to produce some new specialized jobs. My job as the sustainability director didn't exist not only at the University of Oregon, but really largely didn't exist at all. Anywhere you went in this country is as few as 5 years ago. And now there are thousands of sustainability directors that have been hired in the last 5 years and continue to be hired in universities, in small cities, corporations, you name it. These sustainability directors are being hired everywhere, and they're being hired straight out of college. They're being hired with 20 years experience. There's a wide range of experience spaces needed for sustainability directors. And there are lots of others, new types of jobs. Carbon offset certifiers now exist where they didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago. Water trust officers, life cycle analysts. Josh Skov, who's one of our panelists, is a sustainability consultant. Nobody really heard much about that 8 years ago. And when he started his business some 8 years ago, something like that, 9 years ago, the field was pretty empty, and it has crowded up quite a bit. And Josh, of course, can tell you all about that. So there has been, certainly there are lots of new jobs that are being created, and jobs that we can't quite anticipate will be created in the future. But I think as important and maybe more importantly is what we'll see is the greening of existing jobs, right? So we'll see an increased demand for green architects, for journalists with a green thumb or green perspective, engineers, chemists, business leaders, planners, software designers, documentarians, even folks in advertising, teachers, researchers, and that's just scratching the surface, right? Every profession largely that's out there now will have a green feel to it 10 years from now, 20 years from now, sometime during the period in which you'll have your careers. Most of those professions will green up. So those positions, they aren't going to go away is a short thing. They're just going to get greener. So the point is for you is, how to be competitive for those jobs. It's not that you necessarily need a different skill set, right, or knowledge set or experience base. You need those traditional skill sets that you may already have been training for and building upon, and you need then to add some kind of a green skill set or experience base or knowledge base to that. So I want to just say at the outset, while you're still in school, you need to think about ways to take your traditional skill set and green it up, because that's largely, in my mind, in my view, what will make you that much more competitive in a green economy. The other couple other observation I wanted to make is that right now, from my perspective, it seems that the green economy is largely entrepreneurial. Okay, so people willing to innovate or take risks in a variety of ways, those are the folks who are finding themselves in green jobs. And if you ask those people how they got that job or where it came from, they'll tell you that they created it themselves more often than not. They're the first person to occupy that role. They're still defining it. They don't quite know what where its boundaries are, what they should look after, what it should be somebody else's responsibility. That certainly is my experience, and my guess is it's some other people's experiences as well. And so I want to just say that the kinds of skills or attributes that you need in order to go after those jobs are, in addition to the things that you're learning in school, the hard skills, it's some of the other stuff that you don't really get in a classroom environment. It's passion, it's motivation, it's the willingness to take risks that are going to, by and large, define, especially in the first wave of green jobs, those who are more competitive in securing them. So, what I want to end by saying before I pass it off to Greg is that risk taking is a really important thing in the green economy, and the university is a fantastic place to take some risks. So I encourage you to do that while you're here. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Greg.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And can the lights be dimmed slightly so those slides become more visible? I wanted to give an overview of the green job situation, what the potential is. And that button, well, not that much. You can conserve energy this way. Which button works? Okay. This one for advance, all right. Okay, you can argue about this figure if you want, but I think it's a reasonable estimate that If the federal goal were to replace all fossils in 20 years, which is not physically impossible, that's a $10 trillion investment. $10 trillion isn't a lot of money. That's 10 times the current stimulus, so it's a round number. If half of this investment went to jobs, that'd create 100 million jobs at $50,000 a year. This represents a large-scale solution. You can employ, that's the total workforce in America almost, short about 25 million people. So in principle, opportunity space is unlimited if we were to commit to replacing all fossils in 20 years. A huge undertaking, which we won't do, but we could. Just to scale that to reality, in 2006, only 3% of the workforce is in some broad category related to green jobs. Now, it's useful to scale to the 30s to see how much has changed since we talk a lot about the 30s these days. What happened? Well, we built a lot of dams and renewable energy things. Whether they're good or bad in the long run is not the point. The point is where we ended up at the end of this construction was 45% of the nation's electricity portfolio was actually from green power, just about half. So we were there once. Now we're at 8.5%, and that includes hydro. Over this period, and Kevin Hatfield's more of an expert on this than me, so if I say anything stupid, you can correct me, please, Kevin. About $11 billion were invested in just the public works job creation to build bridges and tunnels and national parks and dams and other things. At the height of this involvement, 20% of the total U.S. workforce was involved in a public works project. So that's a large-scale federal stimulus project that created a large number of jobs. What if we were to try to duplicate this today? Well, the inflation rate since that period is 15.5, and the population has grown by 2.5, so you multiply that all out, and you found that this is equivalent to a $400 billion investment in today's dollars, or roughly half the money we've already given away in the stimulus. So what are green jobs? Well, at first order, there's lots of blue-collar jobs in the manufacturing sector that can be converted into installation jobs, installing turbine blades, installing solar panels, installing heat pumps, installing this, installing that. Much of this job creation will be regional, in the Midwest for the construction of wind farms, and in the Southwest for the construction of solar arrays. This is a big worry. It costs a lot less to get solar panels and blade components and everything else produced overseas. If we outsource the production of our green energy infrastructure, we'll lose about 40% of the potential job space. And in the real world, the alternative energy permitting process will slow the rate of installation, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. There's a lot of jobs for lawyers, by the way, that are coming as a result of this, lots. What are green job areas? Well, there's building retrofitting. That's an ongoing need. There's issues of mass transit and improvements there. There's certainly a large niche in alternative fuels, energy efficient transport, wind power, I already talked about solar power, cellulosic biofuels and other alternative fuels. And also there's a lot of jobs coming related to the smart grid, which essentially merges internet technology with the transmission and monitoring of power. There's a huge opportunity space there. A lot of computer science majors are going to end up as smart grid designers and employees as a result of this. And how do these areas map themselves into what real people do? Well, there's design aspects, planning, consulting, the kind of stuff Josh does. There's production, workers in factories making stuff. There's workers in the field installing stuff. There's a lot of certification that has to go, whether it respects to green buildings or with respect to safety issues in your wind farm or geothermal farm or whatever. So there's a huge certification field out there. Lots of positions in operations and a few positions in management. So whatever your field of study is, you can probably map it into one of those areas. Now I want to conclude by talking about the real world and the fact that real world production rates truly matter And they're generally ignored in all of this because we don't really live in the real world. We plan in an ideal world and then end up being held accountable by real world constraints that we didn't think of in advance. And we can't afford to do that in this area. So we have to make those things, wind turbine blades, and we have to make those things, silicon-based PV panels. And the issue is, how many can you make? What's the production rate relative to our demand? So for solar production, there are 400 fabrication plants around the world, maybe about 15% in the US, whose aggregate output's about 3 gigawatts per year of panels. That number doesn't mean anything to you, but the last two do. So to reach just 10% of US electricity production from solar PV, from this worldwide infrastructure, and this is worldwide, we're just talking about 10% of US electricity, would take 30 years at this rate. So if you want to scale to real-world demand for alternative technologies, solar in particular, you got to build 4,000 of these plants now. Not 10 years from now, not 20 years. You have to build 4,000 of them now to get the output to scale to what we need. Well, that's not going to happen overnight. You don't go from 400 to 4,000 very easy, but that's what needs to be done. It's analogous to the following argument. Suppose that we decide that selling 100 million cars in the U.S. will be the best thing for our future. Well, we only can make 17 with our current infrastructure, so how the hell are you going to make 100 million? It's physically impossible. In the same way, it's physically impossible to produce 50 gigawatts a year of solar power. And with wind turbine blades, there's a real nice case study that you can scale to the whole world now. So there's this new blade facility that got opened in Windsor, Colorado, outside of Denver last March. It's a 225,000 square foot plant. That's pretty big. It produces 600 blades per year. It employs 700 people. The 600 blades go on 202 megawatt turbines, 3 blades per turbine. So the total output from this one facility is 400 megawatts. To reach the 10% goal that I said before for solar, you have to have 250 of these facilities in operation right now. Not one. We only have one. We need 250. And that's what the real world is these days. The real world can't ramp up its production fast enough to meet even the most aggressive energy policy. And that's where all the future investment needs to be going is significantly ramping up production infrastructure in the U.S. So we just sum up here. That's what I just said. We have to do this. Otherwise, alternative energy is a niche. It's never going to get above 10%, ever. And there's a huge amount of jobs, as we found out. You know, there was no unemployment during World War II. When you ramp up your production to beat the enemy, we just outproduced the enemy. That's how we won the war. Everybody gets a job. So we've been there once before, and it would be possible to do this. But this is a huge effort because there's 300 million of us now, not 125 million. Unfortunately, we already gave away 0.8 trillion of our potential infrastructure dollars, and little of it went in this direction. So the immediate outlook is that by necessity, the green jobs economy is going to ramp up in the areas of design and planning and consulting, and not in the areas of retooling factories and installation and production, unless we create significant more facilities like right now.
Okay, thanks, Greg. So now we're going to hear from Ryan.
All right. So given I'm the economist up here, I guess I could make this easy and say, why haven't we made these investments in these projects yet? Right? And the easy answer is that they haven't been profitable, which kind of poses this question of, can the free market get us to this optimal outcome, right? One of the issues that we've been facing as a site is we know we value renewable energy, green jobs. That's something we place a lot of value on. But certainly it hasn't been profitable from an investment standpoint. But can the free market alone, or do we need to help the free market get us to this optimal outcome? And I think I can easily say, hey, let's just let everyone go after what is in their best incentive, and we'll see where we end up in 10, 15 years. But looking at today, I think we can all agree that the free market has not been the most efficient at allocating resources. Focusing on the job aspect, we have 8.5% unemployment in the US. Most states are looking at over 10% unemployment. So this really brings up the idea of can we get job creations out of renewable energies? And Greg pointed a lot to the 1930s. My biggest concern about all this focus on the green technology is, are we forming a green bubble in technology? 1930s, we had the New Deal come out. We saw a lot of people go to work building dams and public works projects. Well, 1941 hit and the projects were complete. Where did the workers go? To war, right? Well, is that what we're looking at in 10 to 15 years? Are we going to pour in tons of money, trillions of dollars into building these resources that are not, for jobs that are not sustainable? So I think more importantly, not only do we need to look at sustainable resources, sustainable technologies, we need to look at, are we going to be creating the right types of jobs to last for 20, 30 years down the road? Right? The US economy over the last 20 years has struggled with creating real jobs. We were the benefit of a dot-com boom in the 1990s, benefit of construction boom in the 2000s. Now over the next 15 years, are we going to be in a green boom? Right? Are we going to end up with all of a sudden in 15 years, we've built all the resources, where do the jobs go? So I think that is an important question, is are we looking 15, 20 years down the road in these jobs, right? You guys want a job not only when you graduate college, but you want to be able to maintain a job 20 years down the road. Now, given I said that, I love the fact that we put a lot of emphasis on these green jobs, but the stimulus package, like Greg mentioned, completely failed at it, right? $787 billion in fiscal stimulus, money that we could throw wherever we wanted. Of that, $94 billion went to eco-friendly resources. We certainly didn't promote green jobs in that stimulus package. To put it in perspective, China and their stimulus package, over $200 billion into eco-friendly projects. China, right? More than double what we did, right? Of their stimulus package, nearly 80% was into eco-friendly jobs. So certainly we have not put that, we've said we want to emphasize this, but the government has certainly not put that emphasis in place. So we had a golden opportunity to spend money. We didn't take advantage of it, right? We could spend it on whatever we wanted. Certainly that was something we passed up. I talked about the sustainable jobs. The other issue that I really wanted to address is that in trade, when we look at developing countries, we have this infant industry argument that when a developing country is establishing some industry and the government keeps providing subsidies to this industry, right? They're basically helping this industry grow. And then all of a sudden, once that industry grows to be compatible on the world market, we find that they're not cost efficient, they can't compete on the world market, and the government's poured a lot of subsidies at an inefficient project. So what I'm getting at is we want to make sure that when we are investing in these technologies, we want to find the ones that are the most profitable, right? Hydroelectricity, wind power, geothermal. We know those are a lot more cost efficient than solar energy, right? So we need to make sure we focus on those areas when we look at this. We've already dumped billions of dollars into solar energy, and it's still not as cost efficient as wind turbines. The last thing is we're talking about job growth, right? Can we create jobs, right? That's the whole objective. Now, I think there are green jobs to be had out there, but we want to look at net job growth, right? As we end up replacing coal-fired plants, right? Are we just substituting work? A green job is someone that was once building an SUV and is now building a hybrid car, right? Well, there was no net job growth there, right? Unemployment doesn't change. So we want to make sure that when we look at this job growth, right, are we actually creating jobs? The one thing that was great, not necessarily great, but one thing with coal was you needed people to keep getting the coal, right? Once you build a wind farm, hundreds of workers went to build the wind farm. How many people does it take to sustain it and to operate a wind farm, right? Certainly not as many as it took to build it. Right? So those are some of the concerns we need to make sure we address, that we're not just creating these jobs 5, 10 years down the road. I think it is a move in the right direction, but we need to be careful that it's not this temporary bubble and then we're not sitting here 10 years later going, man, what can we do now? Right? You know, Greg mentioned the Depression, and I think that is a perfect example of if we spend the money into the right projects, we can create that job growth, but we need to be careful is once those projects are created, did we create those sustainable jobs? Like I said, mine's going to be short. So that's about it for my opening comments.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to hear from Marcus, who's going to give us a labor perspective.
Yeah, I'm neither an environmental scientist nor an economist, but I work with labor unions at the Labor Education Research Center. We do continuing education and applied research for Oregon workers and their unions. But my concern starts pretty much where Ryan's did, where he said, are we creating the right kinds of jobs? And I guess I'd like to spin that a little bit more and talk not just about the numbers of the jobs, but the quality of those jobs. And between labor organizations and environmentalists over the questions of, is there a choice between jobs and the environment? And any of you who lived here back in the 1980s or grew up in Oregon know that there was a terrible fissure between rural communities and between people in the forest products industries and their unions and environmentalists. And we're at a moment where we may experience that again. That divided environmentalists from workers, and we seek to fashion dialogues to talk about that. And in that capacity, we often ask these sorts of questions about green jobs. First of all, of course, do they contribute directly to preserving or enhancing environmental quality? But also we ask a series of questions, and this is what the debate is about in the labor movement, about the quality of those jobs. Do they pay a family wage, in addition to knowing how many jobs we create? As we know, U.S. workers' wages have been either stagnant or falling since the late 1970s, depending on where you set the marker and how you measure that. And that's especially true in Oregon's rural, timber-dependent communities. Do these new jobs, new green jobs, create good-paying jobs? And there's a mix of answers to that. It's a whole spectrum of some really low-paying jobs and some higher-paying jobs. We do know that there's still a great advantage to workers in having a union job. In manufacturing, although that sector has shrunk, there's still about a 14% wage advantage, a 28% advantage in who has health care and who doesn't. And when you get to things like pensions, it's about 50% difference between being a union member and not being a union member. So we want to ask what sort of jobs those are, how do they pay? We want to ask now, do they provide health care benefits? Because so many Americans and so many Oregonians do not have employer-paid health benefits. When we create jobs in these sectors, whether it be retrofitting in construction or whether it be in manufacturing wind turbines, do they pay health benefits as well as a decent wage? We want to ask whether those jobs offer career paths to more highly skilled and in better employment opportunities for people over a period of time, where they can skill up and move into higher paid professions, whether you can go from being a technician in the solar industry to going into an apprenticeship program in a licensed trade, so that your wages might go up to the $20 to $30 an hour range. Or are these jobs temporary jobs and dead-end jobs where a bunch of people are just going to go out and nail up solar panels on the roofs of some houses for the summer and then they're finished? Is it a career or is it a temporary stopgate measure? Do they offer gateways to credentialed trades for people? Credentials that are portable, where you can take that to another state other than Oregon. Fourth one, do companies that engage in the green economy that provide adequate paybacks to the communities and workers in return for the type of subsidies that we're talking about giving some of those firms, for direct financial incentives and future tax incentives? And these are the types of policy questions that a growing network of labor activists and environmental activists and community activists are asking as they talk about environmental policy and green jobs. And you have a number of organizations active in Oregon and around the country. The ones that I work most closely with are people like the Apollo Alliance, the Blue-Green Alliance, which is a coalition of the Steelworkers Union and the Laborers Union, service employees, and the Sierra Club and the Natural Resource Defense Council. Those are people that never would have even spoken to each other during the spotted owl controversy, are now in a coalition together. And underlying their activities, I think, is a philosophy that public support for limitations on greenhouse gas emission is not going to happen unless we pay some attention to the repercussions for workers and their communities, to protect the rights of workers and their living standards. The social equity and worker rights issues being raised by these alliances, I'm just going to mention 5 of them briefly. If you have questions, we can talk about them later. They stem from the original list I mentioned. First one, when we subsidize green manufacturing or green construction, retrofitting, weatherization, should employers meet some type of a labor standard when we give them some sort of incentive? The U.S. average manufacturing wage is around $19 an hour, but many of these manufacturers pay considerably less than that. Should we require some sort of standard? Should it be based on what's called the prevailing wage in the community? Should it be based on some other indice, like a living wage that we've set in our community that is something higher than the federally established poverty line? We have lots of best practice firms in this community that do that, but we also have lots of low roaders who look for cheap labor to do this type of work. So should we require standards? This income gap between union workers and non-union workers is even more serious in construction, by the way, than it is in manufacturing. Okay, so in manufacturing you might be talking about people making $15 an hour, but there's a huge group of construction workers in this country, up to half of the construction workers in this country making about $12.50 an hour, doing many of the jobs that would be associated with the retrofitting in the construction industry. There's similar other wage issues in other sectors of the green economy, like recycling. Most of those jobs are low-paid jobs. And what about workers' rights in those firms that we subsidize? Can we get employers in subsidized or incentivized industries to agree to neutrality when unions come in to organize workers? There's a recent story in our local labor press about a dispute around Solar World, the German corporation up in the metropolitan area, which has closed down its unionized operations in Vancouver and opened up at several dollars an hour less in Hillsborough after receiving considerable enterprise zone tax breaks. Should we have standards that they have to meet if they're going to have those tax incentives? And then finally, one last example, and I'll sort of wrap it up, but what about training programs for green jobs? What do those look like? I think the labor movement believes that they should, that the people involved with those programs should contain a diverse spectrum of the stakeholders in this question. That includes employers and industry representatives, community-based and workforce development organizations, the community colleges who operate so many of these programs, the labor unions and joint apprenticeship programs who operate training programs, and government are all those people in the room when you talk about what is the education program for a real career ladder for a long-term job, not a temporary summer job. Those programs should train for real jobs that have career ladders that are portable and that offer a future. And then finally, what about the multiplier effect of purchasing in the local economy? Greg mentioned this about wind turbines and manufacturing blades in Colorado. Should we subsidize green development that outsources products, equipment, or services that goes outside our own communities? Can't we build this stuff in Oregon? Can't we build it in the United States? Doesn't that have a multiplier effect on the economy? And should we make that a standard when we actually set up incentives for manufacturers? Can't we build those wind turbine blades in Oregon? And then finally, how do you enforce those agreements, which is a huge policy question. So all these things are the sort of social equity issues that I think workers and community activists and labor organizations are concerned about when they think about what are the policy alternatives in encouraging green manufacturing, in encouraging green retrofitting in construction. And I've got a handout, sort of a packet of readings about some of these issues, including the dispute about Solar World and some references to other sources of community labor organizations that deal with this issue. I gave them to somebody and they'll get passed around. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. So now we're going to hear from Josh Skov, somebody who actually has a green job here in Eugene. Started his own consulting firm and has clients around the nation, and he helps them move their operations onto a greener path. So Josh, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Steve. And thank you to all of you for being here. I really appreciate this turnout. I realize, we've all got things to do and classes to go to and other places to be, so this is a really fantastic turnout. You really You've filled the room, and I certainly appreciate that as a speaker. I also just want to say it's a privilege to be speaking with the folks that are here. There's an awful lot of collective insight. I think one thing I hope we'll look forward to in the discussion period with the Q&A and the back and forth here is that I mean, essentially all of the goals and all of the higher level aims that were laid out, I share entirely. And then I think that different people here have different pieces of the puzzle. And so I look forward to pointing some jabs in that direction. I assure you, for example, Marcus, you do not nail solar panels on the roofs of homes. There's a little more to it. But all joking aside, the concerns that were laid out here, I think, are absolutely crucial. What kinds of jobs are we going to get? How do we make sure that we meet some of these green goals and get the right kinds of jobs and the right kind of economic development? Now, I want to be clear about who I am and what I do. I represent a very different type of entity from most of the folks up here. And I'm going to I'm going to describe what my perspective is. I'm very briefly going to say what I think the frame of a lot of our thinking about green jobs and the economy should be right now. And then I'm going to give you 3 quick points. And I think I'll be under time, Steve. I know you're watching. So the first thing is, I'm one of a couple of co-founders and principals of Good Company. We're a research and consulting firm here in town, based in town. We've worked in, as Steve mentioned, we've worked in 8 states and Canada for over 70 clients in the public and private sectors. Goodcompany.com is our URL. Feel free to go there for more information, and I'll stick around afterwards to answer questions. But I do want to say that I am here as someone from the private sector, and although I do serve government as much as I serve industry, the people I serve in government are often the people who have to be the business people in their organizations, at universities and in public agencies. They have to watch their finances. And that leads me to the one piece of framing that I think we should speak, because it's missing from the front pages, it's missing from the A sections of your newspapers, it's missing largely from the public discourse right now, and that is that the climate crisis specifically, I don't want to reduce all green thinking and all green jobs just to global warming and climate change, but we should be clear. The climate crisis is not an economic crisis at the same time. It is a source of tremendous economic opportunity. The first, depending on whom you ask, 25 to 35% of greenhouse gas emissions reduction in the U.S. economy could come at what economists call negative cost. That's also known as cost savings, right? So this is a big deal because there's lots of stuff that costs a lot. And I think what Ryan said about how some things are better deals than others, I don't necessarily share the point about solar, but it's a detail to get into. The point is there is a lot of economic opportunity that is green at the same time. And we want to make sure that we let people know about that and learn about those realities. So that's the opening frame. So very quickly, 3 quick points. Mark Haney of IBM and Preeta Banerjee of Brandeis Business School wrote an article on green jobs in environmentalleader.com the other day, and they were talking about the need for a T-shaped professional. And I'm going to show you my sophisticated visual aid. Yes, I did this with a ballpoint pen. That's annoying. I didn't have a Sharpie with me. A T-shaped professional. What do I mean? I don't mean reshape your bodies physically. What I mean is, and what they meant in the article, is that the structure of your skills needs to be deep in some area. You need to have a home discipline, especially coming out of college or coming out of grad school. But you also need to have some breadth. You need to understand some other areas. They were speaking specifically about people in technology needing to have some sense of the business environment and public policy, and that's a great example. But we could just as well think about architecture and landscape architecture and planning, needing to understand each other much better. Engineering and a whole range of fields need to know more about what others do. I really encourage you to think hard about what that breadth is that you can explore when you're in college, especially, and that's true in grad school as well. As much as you're trying to do, a specific focus. So that's my first point, being a T-shaped professional. However, I think it's a little more complicated. I think increasingly we're going to need, let me flip to the other side of my sophisticated visual aid, we're going to need what I call pie-shaped professionals, if anyone can see that. And by that I mean we're increasingly going to need people who have more than just some soft understanding of other disciplines, but people who have mastered 2 areas. And that's not something that you can do in college. I'm not talking about this. I'm not talking about a double major. I'm talking about deeper professional mastery. It's something that you're going to get to over time, and I'll return to that in just a moment. Second, core skills. You probably get this from your professors or your parents, or maybe when you visit your hometown, you hear from your 11th grade teachers. I don't know, but I just want to just say out loud, because I think this is in everyone's minds, some core skills that you need to make sure you do not leave college without, and that you're looking to develop when you're in the workforce as well. Writing, and by writing I don't just mean the first draft, I mean the ability to edit your own work and edit others. Science literacy. If you don't know what causes the tides or the seasons, if you don't know the difference between an atom or a molecule, I encourage you to explore the wonderful realm known as science. And this is actually quite a big deal increasingly, because there are a lot of very complex technological problems that are part of what we think are green jobs, that we think are solutions to some of our green problems. Very briefly, final point. What I just laid out may sound like I'm asking you to be some sort of superhuman academic and professional machine who just becomes omniscient overnight. That's not what I mean at all. I think the most important thing you should take away from what I'm saying is being on a learning trajectory. Steve said that his job didn't exist a few years ago, and similarly mine didn't. Well, I would say that even though I've been in my job for 9 years, the job I have today didn't exist 4 years ago. In other words, my job has evolved before my eyes, and I have had to learn with that experience, with market demands, with changing patterns in the world. And I encourage you to build that sensibility yourself. Become someone who learns continually. That's not easy, it takes effort, but I think you need to be thinking about your learning as going far beyond just a college education, beyond a formal education. The one comment I'll make about the labor force on that point is that you need to think about your first job out of college or your first few jobs in this way. You shouldn't be thinking just about how secure the job is. You shouldn't be thinking merely about the pay that you're getting. Think about what you're learning in that job, what the professional development opportunities are formally, what you'll learn by doing in that job. That's actually a tremendously important part of a green economy as we've been talking about it, because there will be so much change that most of the jobs that are going to be out there, most of the new jobs that will come about in the next 25 years aren't going to come about in the next 2 or 3. They won't be jobs that you can know how to train for right now. They're things that you need to be, that you will have access to if you're on a learning path as an individual and as a professional. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to someone who actually helps people do all of this work. Roger, but Steve, do you want to say anything?
Sure. So thank you, Josh. You are under your 10 minutes, just barely. Now we're going to turn it over to Roger, who's an instructor at LCC. He started one of the early technician training programs that's very well respected across the United States. And so lots of students come to Roger, get a 2-year training under his leadership, and then fan out across the Northwest and even across the country to actually do some of the green jobs that have been talked about here. So Roger, take it away.
Well, I'd like to give the rest of my time over to the gentleman from Good Company. It was so good. Thanks a lot, Josh. I'm at Lane Community College. I've been there since 1992. The program itself, and I'll explain that in just a second, has actually been there since 1980. So in our industry, we call people who buy things early, like those people who bought the early Prius and the contact fluorescence when they were this glaring white lamp. Early adopters. Lane is an early adopter, and you should be proud that it's in your community because, like I said, we've been doing this. When the last bubble began, when Carter was in office, he threw a lot of money at weatherization and solar water heating. And the utilities didn't have anyone to staff their weatherization departments, or their residential energy analyst departments. So a guy from our physics department, like Josh was saying, get into some science. That's where this guy was from, and he got it. He wrote a grant to the National Science Foundation, picked up $300 grand to start this energy management program, and ran it until 1988. Here's another important point. Greg was talking about bubbles. Watch out for bubbles. And a good indicator is who is in the White House. Because in 1988, the Reagan administration, I don't mean to offend anybody's politics, the Reagan administration's policies finally filtered down, trickled down, I think is what he called it, trickled down to where the work really gets done. And they removed all of the incentive programs from the public power providers like the Bonneville Power Administration, who provide money to public utilities to provide incentives to you and me. So that dried up, and then fully so, because if there isn't something at the end of a 2-year degree program students are really going to get angry. And so, you know, ethically, Alan closed the program down. This Alan Gubruk was the guy's name. In 1992, the Bonneville Power Administration saw a little writing on the wall. This was after the second Bush administration. I'm sorry, the first Bush administration. They've blended together. The Bonneville Power Administration saw an opening to get some commercial energy efficiency work done. Efficiency work in buildings like this, or any other building on your campus or in our community. Those buildings in between the residential sector and the manufacturing sector is what we consider to be the commercial sector. So the Bonneville Power Administration came to the college and said, geez, we know you had a program there in the early 80s, why would you mind opening up? Because we think there's going to be a labor market. Well, one of the last things that Bush did was sign the Energy Policy Act in '92, which opened the doors to deregulation. And then, although we had these dollars, this is when I came into the program actually, we had these dollars to start training individuals and get some momentum into this commercial energy efficiency sector. And because of a policy signed into legislation by George Bush I, kind of closed the door again. And so, although we had this huge surge of people coming in, I think our first class was on the order of 32, and we graduated 28 of them, most of whom got work, by the way, in this unstable environment that George Bush caused. It was a kind of an up and down ride for us pretty much ever since then. So the point is, pay attention to who's in the White House, because we have this wonderful, unbelievably intelligent person there now, and he's doing all these great things that may in fact cause a bubble. I mean, we may have all of this stuff going on and we may be doing all this wonderful work, and then if we elect the wrong person to come back in, we may have another science-based administration. No, they didn't believe in science back then. For the Bush administration, the second Bush, thought science was nuts, and again, back to Josh's comment about learn your science and know what's right and what's wrong. So we started the program back up in 1992 and started working with commercial energy analysts, the people that the Bonneville Power Administration wanted us to pick up, and it's been a very cyclical ride depending upon who's in the White House and what sort of information was coming out in the media. We would have a lot of students, and we would have a few students, and we would have a lot of students, and we would have a few students. Some other contributors to this have been the cost of fuel. Last summer, we were approaching $5 a gallon. I used biofuels in my truck, and it was at $4.99. Fortunately, it stayed there, so I never have to say I paid $5 a gallon for gas. But $4.99 from Sequential, paid it all summer long. Happy to do that, support the industry. But that's when things really started to get exciting in my business. We had a lot of people asking about training for the energy world. And in a second, I'll give you our demographics. In 2003, we started our renewable energy program. So we taught people how to nail solar panels to rooftops. How to nail solar panels to rooftops. Probably never going to hear the end of that, you guys.
That's all right. I hope for no less.
So, and we did it because of my past experience and that of others in our industry, and that was when we had these last incentive programs during the Carter era. Huge incentives went to solar water heating, and everyone came out that had a pickup truck, a dog, and a boombox, and claimed themselves to be solar installers. Well, they weren't. And the percentage of systems that failed was astronomical. And it continued to be that way. People have this idea that solar doesn't work in Oregon. Well, if you take a look at the entire year's perspective, solar works very well in Oregon, and as well as it does in the Southwest on the other side of the Cascades. So why not Oregon? Well, people have this idea that solar doesn't work in Oregon because systems failed, and the failure was because of bad installation. So we started our program in 2003 to kind of offset that experience. We want this to be an ongoing technology. We want it to be as common in the building environment as are windows and doors. You put a window in, you put a solar panel on the roof. You put a door in, you put a water heating panel on the roof. That very simple. We want it to be just like that. So to make sure it's that way, we have to make sure installations are good. My demographics, surprisingly enough, how many of you are liberal arts students? I'll see you guys in a couple of years. And it's because we train people to do stuff. I mean, we train people, not that you don't know how to do stuff, I don't mean to be insulting. But 75% of my students at the two-year college have four-year degrees. And when you poll these students, you find out that they have degrees in religion and philosophy. They have degrees in, and again, I don't mean to be insulting, we have degrees in environmental studies. We have degrees in all of these wonderful disciplines that are so interesting to study. But what's going to go on with them once you get out of school? Well, you're going to see me, probably, if you want to get into the energy industry. And you're going to see me in the next couple of years because we are still, believe this, we are still the only two-year program in the country that teaches a comprehensive commercial auditing curriculum. Can you believe that? There are 70 billion square feet of commercial space that's conditioned in our building stock throughout the country. 70 billion square feet. It gets heated and cooled, gets lit. About 1% of it works well, is what we call a high-performance building. So we have this portfolio of buildings that need to have work done to them, and we are the only two-year degree program in the country that teaches people how to evaluate these buildings and then make off-the-shelf recommendations to improve the energy efficiency of these things. Unbelievable. So our demographic is about 75% four-year degree, about the age of Josh and Steve. So they're kind of transitioning employment opportunities. And so it's an interesting mix now. When we first started, we were dealing with folks who were coming out of the 1980s recession, dislocated workers from the wood products industry. Probably most of them had never been to school before, and so it was a deal. So we've had to change our curriculum to address this higher level of intelligence that we're challenged by, or higher educated group that we're challenged by. Our program has grown from 30 students of 2 years ago. How many do you have time, Steve? 30 students from 2 years ago to 60 students last year to 90 students this year. We have 3 programs, one in energy efficiency, one in renewable energy, and our third one will address what both Steve and Josh do, and that is resource conservation management. It's like a mini version of a sustainability coordinator's curriculum. And we're really excited about doing that because now we're going to deal with stuff on a larger scale in the built environment, which is really a lot of fun. So how are we going to handle the output of 90 students? Because they're going to be with us for 2 years, and then they're going to go out looking for jobs. 2 years ago, I would have said, I don't know if I'm going to take any more students because as the director of the program, it's my responsibility to make sure that there's employment when students are finished with our program. So last year the college said, can you take another 30? I said, well, yeah, okay, but because we now have this renewable energy sector that's growing like crazy, and we have this energy efficiency sector, I think I can get work for these folks if they take a look at the nation as their workplace opportunities. They came back to me again during the summer and said, at fall term, and said, what do you think about taking your waiting list of 25, bringing those folks in for fall of '09? And I said, gloves are off at this point because from my seat, the opportunities in the green workforce with some boundaries, I'm not talking about the welders and the plumbers and architects of course fit in there, but the engineers who are doing traditional engineering, those guys will fit into it, but as somebody already said, these are incumbent workers, so there is no net gain on the employment. What we're talking about are creating new jobs. And the demand for our folks coming out of my program is so intense, I don't have a worry about these guys getting work, these people getting work, because we have a mix of men and women. I have no concern about that. If they take a look at the country as a workplace, because we're in. There are some PV training programs around the country. There's IBEW, there are other organizations, International Brotherhood of Electric Workers. there are other organizations around there that do training. Other community colleges, maybe a half a dozen that do some technical training in the renewable energy area, but not much. And so, it's quite an open field at this point. It's going to get really crowded really soon because Barack is throwing money at us left and right. Our first attack is going to be in weatherization of low-income homes. That money is on the ground right now, and we have $500+ in grants to train people to install weatherization products right now. So that's the first attack, and then we're going to be increasing the level of rigor with the education that these folks are going to be getting through different programs. And all community colleges have the ability to access these dollars. So our territory is going to get a little crowded. Thank you.
Okay. Well, how about a round of applause for our speakers? And as I hope people stayed on time, we have a full half an hour really to engage your questions. I really appreciate your patience and focus on the presenters. Why don't we open it up for a bit to your questions, and if we get through some of those, then we can also open it up to the speakers to take jabs at each other, which apparently Josh. But at least we'll table that for a while and get to some of the questions you have. And feel free to address them to everybody or somebody in particular, if whatever makes the most sense for you. So why don't you go ahead? Yep.
My question is if you think green jobs have more opportunity in creating new things, like architects creating new buildings, or if it's going to be more of a fix what we already have.
Yes. Sorry, do you want me to say more? Okay. No, I think that's a great question. I think it's really important because it's easy to fixate on one or the other. I think, fortunately, if you go up and get trained in those skills, they're going to overlap a tremendous amount. Whether you're retrofitting existing buildings or building new ones, not entirely, but there's lots of overlap. And don't forget, as soon as you build a new building, it's an existing building, so there's a building to maintain and improve over time. The other thing I'd say about that is that our existing building stock is pretty big, right? I mean, there's a lot there. It represents, the trillions and trillions of dollars of investment, and it's not something we're going to let go of. So there's, I think that's one of the reasons that, as Roger pointed out, there's tremendous opportunity there.
Yes, the architecture schools across the country, we're seeing pretty significant changes in schools of architecture. I don't know if you guys know this, but Oregon in the 70s was the home of passive solar building design. Ed Mazaria was the architect of that whole program. He was an architect in that whole program, but he has international fame in a project that he calls the 2030 Challenge, and that is to get to any new building built by 2030 should be net carbon, or zero carbon, excuse me, not net carbon. Right here from the University of Oregon, we're seeing these transitions in engineering schools now, rather than mechanical engineers who work primarily with comfort systems in buildings. Consequently, they know a lot about them. The traditional engineering schools are starting to change from having one course in building mechanical systems, comfort systems, to having a whole emphasis area in that. Across the country, that's happening. It's driven by the labor market needs, and it's driven by you guys. It's driven by students wanting to get into these programs and have this environmental bent to what it is that they're learning, which is fascinating.
Other questions? Yeah.
I was wondering if you think that any job that's created for an economy that's premised on infinite growth can be a green job?
Either of you want to take a stab at that, Ryan?
Any job that can be premised on infinite growth, so I think we know that we can't premise anything on infinite growth, right? I think today's a perfect example, and that was the whole point of my argument was, I don't see if we spend all these resources, and Roger pointed out this bubble that could form, that's my concerns. I don't know if the green sector is going to have infinite growth, right? know if we do have the resources or if it's cost efficient. You still, as much as we'd love to go into this everything green, everything renewable energy, it still comes down to, is it efficient to do that? Do we have the resources to do that? And I think that's going to be the bigger binding constraint, more than, is all these jobs going to be able to be around for infinite growth periods? And that's, I think that's the concern, is that they're not going to be.
I've heard Greg give a lecture on some of the material resources, material constraints that is on, on producing windmills and all the sort of the engine that's going to provide, or that's going to harness all of the energy, the ambient energy in the world. So that might, maybe Greg, you could talk a little bit about that and how that fits into this guy's question. Does that help?
I can?
Yeah.
Well, I'm a physicist, so infinite growth is by definition impossible. I think there's no real answer to that question. I think what you're getting at, maybe, I hope, is that we got a finite planet, and we already have too large a rate of growth on this finite planet. My opinion is that you only get one post-World War II mega bubble per planet, and because during that mega bubble, you use up most of the resources. I'll give you a quick example. China was on pace to use up more Earth material resources from the year 2005 to 2025 than the entire evil Western world did from 1900 to 2005. That pace is no longer there due to this collapse. So my concern about this bubble issue is we can't have another mega bubble. That's physically impossible. And if all this stimulus stuff is designed to produce another mega bubble, we're doing exactly the wrong thing. We have to reach a new equilibrium in the global system. Now that's going to be forced upon us because it's a chaotic system, but I think it's clear to me that all rates have to go down, period. And the more people you can hire to make rates go down, I think is part, I'm all for the consumption police being a green job, You just go around and, put RFID tags on everybody and measure their consumption and bust them when they go over the limit. So I think there's a lot of potential jobs in monitoring resources at local levels and regional levels and household levels. And this plays into smart grid and stuff like that. So I think there's a consciousness that's coming to the forefront here that we're hopefully evolving away from conspicuous consumption to necessary consumption. And then manage that, and then with appropriate technology and energy, get to sustainability levels.
Just one thing, I heard, you guys know Bob Doppel? He's from your campus. What's the name of Bob's?
He works in the
Climate change initiative.
the Climate Leadership Initiative, which is housed over in the 3 p.m. building.
I heard him speak on one day, not too long ago, and he said if you will not be able to continue with infinite growth in a carbon-based society. And that resonated with me. I don't know what it means. A little bit, I know what it means.
Well, it means at the current rate, we run out of fossils in 35 to 40 years period, so the problem of CO2 pollution becomes moot at that point.
Right. If we can breathe.
Let me get to some other question. Yeah.
Now, I know we don't have a legislator up there. I know, Greg, you keep a pretty close eye on what's going on the legislative end of things. But I got kind of some mixed message between Greg, Ryan, and Roger as far as whether it be this stimulus money or the legislative work that we could be seeing in the next 6 months with the growing majorities in both houses. So I was wondering if any of you guys could give a little talk about what we might be seeing on the policy end and how it might affect what we actually see on the ground. You mentioned there's already money on the ground as far as weatherizing urban buildings and that sort of thing. So
Low-income housing,
Yeah.
that's what it was for. There's a fair, in fact, that was one of the good parts of the stimulus, is a percentage of low-income housing that can actually fall under those dollars is not small. I mean, it's a major effort.
Josh, do you have anything you want to add to it?
I think what you're seeing with a lot of economists right now, since we still are in this recession, is you're seeing a lot of economists say we need another $1 trillion stimulus package because the first one did miss. I think a lot of people are on saying, hey, we just spent $800 billion, but it wasn't effective, and there's still a huge debate because I watched a debate between a couple of economists, and the main argument was right now our unemployment are construction workers, but yet we're creating jobs for nurses. right? So the first stimulus package, a lot of people argued, did not address the primary concerns. And so I think what we would hopefully get is more aid to states in which we can have more construction workers nail solar panels to rooftops.
Marcus, do you want to chime in any way?
On nailing solar panels?
You can take that one now, you can take it later, or you can answer
I
it.
guess I'm just,
Well, I guess the one thing I'd say is that I think our own congressman spoke pretty much to one of the critiques about the stimulus package, and that was that when Pierre DeFazio cast his vote against it, he said, you know, you can look around our congressional district and you can see what the stimulus package was in the 1930s and the infrastructure that was built here. And he said, I'm casting my vote no because I don't think a tax cut is an infrastructure stimulus package. Now, if you apply that to the issues that we have at hand here, whether it be about solar or wind or whether it be about and one of the things I'm interested in is whether it's the whole grid has to be rebuilt or whether you do this stuff in a decentralized way, like by nailing the panels on the rooftops of residences, you know, which is the best way to create jobs and which is the best way to reduce emissions. I think he spoke for a lot of people in saying it's not big enough and it's not directed enough at the infrastructure which goes the distance to solve the problem.
You know, are you asking at the state legislature?
yeah, I guess I wasn't trying to get too
Not
caught
the
up on the
feds.
stimulus plan. What I was
But
kinda going
what's
for.
happening at the states is these various RPS mandates, which we talked about in that class you took 100 years ago, but.
That's a renewable portfolio standard, maybe you could just for everybody
And
else.
so that requires a percentage of total state electricity portfolio to come from renewables by some timescale. Now, the state of Washington's passed an RPS which commits them to 25% by the year 2020, which will be difficult for them to obtain without a lot of infrastructure investments. And there's so far no dovetailing between federal stimulus money and these various state RPSs. Now, the RPS approach is a reasonable way to go to gradually transition your state into something, but you can't get there if you can't build the stuff. And so I think the RPS stuff is probably not going to work out for most states because of this. Now, at the national level, I mean, your typical congressperson doesn't know the difference between a watt and a gigawatt, right? They can't even understand their own electricity bill. There's so much ignorance on this. And then take that one step further, the Department of Energy, which is nominally charged with this, has absolutely no expertise in this. Department of Energy's got to do with weapons, it's got to do with management of nuclear facilities. There's the EREE part in that, which is energy research and something, but they're worried about buildings and stuff. We don't have a national institution or expertise that focuses on a renewable energy policy and the requisite infrastructure. So to first order, that's been thrust down to the states to try and achieve through this RPS process. So my big worry is that no one at the top's paying attention to the big picture in this thing, and so we'll just incrementally piss our way along just like we have been for so long, which is why we're only at 1.5% solar and wind. Or renewable. You know, one shining spot in this is Europe. If we look at what Europe is doing, specifically Germany and Spain, you see what federal mandates can actually do. I mean, Germany's plan is 45% of their country by the year 2030 to become totally renewable. And they don't even have the in-country renewable resources to do it. But it didn't stop them from doing it and putting lots of money in it. Spain's got these giant discounts for solar thermal power. So, you know, we don't know how this is going to follow through with the collapse of the European markets, of course. I mean, perhaps the real thing is there's no money to spend on our future anyway. So what can you do? But I think from a policy point of view, if we look toward Europe, they're aggressive. And, but, you know, on the national landscape, I think the energy thing, it remains way down on our national priority radar. And I don't know how to up it. It's high on some states, but not national.
So usually they refer to the economist as the dismal scientist, but I think for tonight it's the physicist.
Yeah,
But in any case, we do have another economist who might have more hopeful
I'd like to
perspective
follow
on it.
on Greg's optimism for a moment. I just wanted to pitch in, Greg, you may know more about these things, but just at the state level, yes, a bunch of these things should happen, must happen, and can happen only at the federal level, but there's a lot of stuff happening at the state level. One of the tools used in Germany and elsewhere in Europe is something called a feed-in tariff, where instead of just having tax credits, which are really dicey when people have their tax liability, that's what we're seeing for a lot of renewables now. If you have a feed-in tariff, a guaranteed price for a kilowatt hour produced from certain qualifying renewable sources, that you get a lot more than the market rate for that power. That's, I think, in the state legislature right now, and that could be great for a whole bunch of jobs, a whole bunch of renewable energy jobs in Oregon. I think that's why Oregon is a more exciting place to be in a lot of ways. I do want to say, though, we haven't really addressed some of the things that I think Marcus especially brought up that I think are really important. We do have to make sure that we're not just creating jobs and not caring about what kinds of jobs those are. I have to say, I just want to pitch in just anecdotally from the solar and wind worlds that I touch professionally and through colleagues. A lot of those jobs are pretty good jobs. I mean, they're not necessarily, but say in the solar world, a lot of the people working in solar installation are really electricians or plumbers who are focused specifically on putting in solar thermal or solar PV systems. And so they're people who are skilled. Being a plumber or an electrician might not sound super sexy to a lot of you who don't know a lot about it, but that's actually a more secure and higher skilled and more highly rewarded job than most of the service sector. So, both of those. So I think there is some promise there. Those are skilled jobs in a lot of ways. And as far as wind goes, yes, we're putting in wind turbines like crazy right now, but we increasingly have to worry about the service of those wind turbines. They are long-lived, generation-long lives for a lot of this infrastructure, but we still have to worry about how to maintain them. And increasingly, that's where General Electric and Vestas and the other big wind turbine companies are turning, to developing that market.
On the policy side, pay attention to what's going on nationally. The big news today, anybody hear the big news today? What's the big news? Our inspector is turning.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of where I was trying to go with the question, is more of a national level. I mean, talk about the big picture. We got Stephen Chu, head of the Department of Energy. I don't know what that means, but I know the work he was doing at Berkeley was incredibly big picture oriented. So I guess I was just trying to be a little more optimistic and saying, what could we see on the ground as far as the EPA now declaring CO2 being a pollutant, and our inspectors switching over and having a filibuster-proof majority. So I'm trying to kind of see what we might be seeing on the ground here in Eugene, Oregon, and other places with the kind of big changes.
The problem with this big picture is you got to now pick a strategy. Okay, so you're going to invest money in carbon capture and storage, for instance. Are you going to invest money in hydrogen nanotechnologies, so we have a hydrogen battery and a hydrogen economy? Are you going to invest money in solar build-outs? You're going to invest money in wind build-outs? You're going to invest money in modernizing the grid? All of these things need to happen at the same time, but there's not enough money to support all of them. So somebody like Chu is in this incredibly difficult position that if you held a gun to his head, he couldn't pick which one of these things that we need to do. And so that will create this paralysis. The reality, for instance, is we're going to continue to burn coal, and China's going to continue to burn coal. So the most pragmatic thing is dump money into carbon capture and storage, because we're not going to shut off coal burning. But, people don't want to do that because that's like anti-green. You can't look anti-green these days because then you're politically dead. So we just don't have enough resources to, going to the moon was trivial because there was only one moon to go to, right? There wasn't this discussion of, well, let's go to that object or let's go to that object. How do we get there? There was one target, one goal. The problem with the mega solution to this is there's just not one pathway, there's multiple pathways. And when you're confronted with multiple pathways, we're not very good at handling that matrix. So that's, I think, where we are now.
I'd just say really quickly, I'm a little more optimistic than Greg on this, not on the policy front, but in the market front, because actually I think markets are very good at going after many things at once, and that's what markets do. That's what they do really, really well. I'll just give one reference on this. McKinsey Global Institute produced a report called Pathways to a Low Carbon Economy very recently, and it's a revision of a report from late 2007, but it just came out a month or two ago. If you want to see the sectors that not just have the most opportunity for greenhouse gas emissions reduction, but the sectors that can do that and actually make money at it, I suggest that you look at that. So Pathways to a Low Carbon Economy. And then I think I don't think we should spend a lot of time at the highest levels on that.
Let me maybe switch the line of questioning a little bit. We had a handful of questions about big picture policy stuff. We have about 10 minutes left before we're going to disband. And my guess is a lot of you out there who, like we talked about at the very beginning, who are graduating in the next couple of years, who are interested in joining the workforce in some kind of a green way. If any of you out there have any questions about how you do that, there are several people up here who are directly involved in the green economy, either themselves or train people to do it or have some perspective on it. So maybe we could have some questions about that if you have them. Yeah.
That's actually what my question was about. I was going to ask Roger to, if you could kind of just give highlights of sort of the realm of jobs that you're putting your people into,
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Where they go is so interesting. I'm stunned constantly by the fact that we have this very narrow discipline. On the energy efficiency side, it's energy efficiency in commercial buildings. But the need is so broad that we send people to engineering firms as energy efficiency techs, where they get to go out into buildings, they get to analyze the energy using systems of the buildings. Depending upon the engineering firm, they can go back and do what's called an hourly simulation, where they're putting in accurate data and getting an energy report that demonstrates how the building is performing every hour for a full year. Really cool stuff. With that kind of a background, they go to engineering firms, they go to municipalities, they go to state government, they go to federal government, school districts. They go into education. They go into the residential sector to do some auditing and weatherization. They go to work for utilities as either analysts or program managers. Those guys are really interesting. On the renewable side, we are training very specifically, again, for solar water heating and photovoltaic installation. And because our training is pretty thorough, they have the ability to either go in, first of all, we recommend that they do the IBEW training if they're going into the photovoltaic sector, or the union plumbing training. Really, we do, if they are going into the solar water heating sector. That's because, very simply, if they come through our program and get the license that is required by the state of Oregon, they have a certain limit of size that they can install for systems. If you get an electrician's license, for instance, you can write your own ticket in terms of size, and then if the market gets a little weak, you can go wire houses or something. Our people can't. So, but they have the ability to get into the installation sector, and because their information is so deep, and because they're coming to us with work experience already, then they have the ability to go into program management or do some design work. And again, that's back at utilities or engineering firms, stuff like that. We haven't test driven our RCM program yet. By the way, we have another program. It's in water conservation, which is, you think energy is a deal. Water is a deal. Water is the deal. So we've got to pay attention to that.
Yeah, the efficiency and conservation opportunities in energy and water and other types of resources are huge. I think Josh was talking about some, I forget the percentage he quoted, but some 35%, though, you said, Josh, of
25 to 35.
of these opportunities are, have an economic benefit. And so most of that, a lot of that resides in, efficiency upgrades and conservation opportunities. University of Oregon, like lots of universities across the country, is engaged in this process where we have to figure out a trajectory to get from our current emissions load down to a zero emissions load by the year 2050. And so we have to put together what's called a climate action plan. And the way that you do it is you have to figure out how much energy you can reduce on campus just through basic efficiency and conservation measures, how much fuel switching you can do to carbon neutral sources, and then there's some other things you can do as well. So the point that I wanted to make is that we ended up by hiring outside consultants. So we hired a company, we actually hired Josh's company to help out with some of this, and we also hired a company called McKinstry. They'll be on campus in about 4 or 5 weeks, and they'll be going through a handful of our buildings, 9 of them that we've selected for them as proxies for the other 70 buildings on campus. They'll go through those buildings with a fine-tooth comb, look for all of the energy savings opportunities in those buildings, and then extrapolate out across the other 70 buildings and figure out what the total energy savings potential on this campus is, and then what the financing might look like to achieve it. And companies like them are doing that times hundreds of thousands of buildings across the country, other folks hiring them to do that kind of stuff, just like us. So the potential in that particular sector, at least in the short term, until we sort of deal with this huge inefficient building stock that we have, for the next, whatever it might be, 25 years is huge. Other questions? Yep.
I noticed that well, not most of you, all of you are men sitting up there, and you talk a lot about jobs that in the past have been male-dominated industries like construction, and now shifting into the green sector. Do you see a lot of women taking on those jobs, or is it still?
Well, can I just, before Greg's going to answer that, which is fine. Before you do, let me just say that I also noticed, and I'm sure most people in the room noticed, that it's pretty male-intensive up here. That wasn't the intention. We actually did invite 2 women to participate on the panel to provide a female perspective, and unfortunately their schedules just didn't allow it, so you got what you got, and I'm sorry about that. But nonetheless, so let me just say that at the outset, but Greg, go ahead.
Well, I think one of the realities is that a lot of the green job space is somehow tied to engineering and changes in focus of engineering. And so you're going to inherit that gender mix from engineering, which is improving. I think in the aspects of consulting, design, and planning, that should be gender neutral.
Anybody else want to comment on the mix? Yep.
Well, a little bit about the construction trades that I'm familiar with. They're still largely male-dominated, but more and more, I know I've done some work with the electricians in Seattle recently, and they had a lot of women in the program, and that just seems to be a recent change. And there are people, I think, that come from backgrounds where maybe they've already gone to college and have a 4-year degree. It might be the humanities degree that was mentioned before, but they've decided they want to be in a skilled trade and have gone into an apprenticeship program. Those are not the typical people who are in those programs. So it's changing slowly, and it depends on the particular trade. More women in the electricians and fewer in the plumbers, probably, for instance. Still under 10%.
So the good thing about it is there are scholarship and grant opportunities for women in non-traditional training programs.
Anybody else want to, any other guys up here want to take a stab?
Well, I was just going to say, this one's really loud for some reason, but we are seeing across a lot of the labor economists are looking at the trend of more females in college. So look around this room, there are more females here than there are males here, right? We are seeing more females. I mean, I'm in economics, male-dominated fields. We are seeing a higher percent of females. We're seeing a higher percent of females in business. So I don't think you're going to see all male-dominated sectors.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. I don't think we haven't had a single one from this side of the room, so I don't want to have missed anybody accidentally. Is anybody over there that has a question? Yeah.
This might sound long-winded, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to ask.
Some of us are long-winded too, so don't worry.
And I don't know who to direct it to, but, and I don't want to sound like a cynic, but it sounds like the whole solar thing, because we focused a lot on solar, and I've heard different views on how effective or how efficient solar really is on the production side. But it sounds like we're looking at solar as a brass ring, and I mean, the United Nations said that the highest contributor to global warming was raising animals for food. It had nothing to do with building emissions, and we're all talking about electricity, and all of that electricity has to do with our food. And I'm going to use Cuba as an example. When they hit peak oil in the 90s, they had to focus entirely on organic agriculture. That's also a large, substantial proportion of our agricultural workers are females. And if we were to switch all of our, this is a lot, I know, if we were to switch a lot of our, or mandate a lot of our agriculture to be organic, it would not only sustain our food system longer, it would be healthier and safer, and it would employ more people because you have to have more manual labor in order to perpetuate that kind of agriculture. And so I'm wondering if we're just looking at solar or buildings, if you've already all thought of this, or if this is something for Oregon State, not necessarily LCC, but that it would be naive to just look at green jobs as I'm going to work at a desk and consult with people. So I don't really know if that was a question, but you can.
Well, there's potential, a lot of green jobs associated with growing fuel, okay? Switchgrass, for instance. So any large-scale change of agricultural process, as you suggest, would be part of the green job economy. I think there's a whole sector out there trying to figure out how to make better use of land, for instance. Just to throw out my favorite example of the urban wasteland and a project that hasn't been done yet, but we put a lot of people to work for a little while. So we've got all these urban brownfields everywhere, right? Pretty much toxic wastelands. But there's power there, there's a grid there. Why aren't we putting wind turbines or solar panels? Philadelphia's my favorite example, because 1/3 of Philadelphia is brownfield these days, 1/3. You can put enough photovoltaic cells on that 1/3 brownfield in Philadelphia to give the city all its summertime electricity. And that would be a short-term project, but it would put thousands of people to work to build this one thing. And so this kind of leads to what I think has been a misrepresented idea that these jobs aren't sustainable, because we're not going to do this in 20 years. That's a pipe dream. We've been lucky to do it in 50 years, or 100 years. Well, maybe in 100 years. So this whole sector is going to move from one project to another, to another, to another. And so this endeavor. I mean, we didn't build an infrastructure that pumps out 400 million gallons of gas a day to consumers in 10 years. That took 100 years to build. So switching to an alternative energy economy will be similarly a 100-year project in real life. So I do think that most of these jobs are sustainable and transferable to other parts, whether they're agriculturally motivated, whether design motivated, or whatever. The last thing I would say is that colleges and universities are doing a terrible job of giving people the relevant skill set. And, you know, we changed glacially. We're still, well, I'm serious, we're still in a post-World War II way of educating. Now, World War II ended, I think, more than 60 years ago, almost 65 years ago, and we haven't figured that out yet. So, you know, there needs to be pressure from students that, you know, demand to be more relevant education, but there also needs to be us taking advantage of opportunities to create new programs with some of this grant money and the like. But the bottom line is there's a pretty large disconnect between what universities are preparing, the world the universities are preparing you for, and the world that now we live in. Because the world we live in now is different than the world we lived in last year, because it's much different. Who knows what the chaos is going to settle out to.
So as Greg said, universities are what they move glacially, but of course glaciers are moving a lot faster these days than they used to. So
in the wrong direction.
Well,
too.
sure. So in any case, but you know, so I just wanted to respond to your questions. I think it's a really good one. So for whatever the reason, we really did get quite heavily focused on renewable technologies and an energy focus, and that really isn't the full spectrum of what the green economy has to offer. Right? We could have talked at length about tech transfer to developing countries. We could have talked about simple things you could do, like building stoves and taking them out and doing microfinance across the world, and, you know, dispersing cook stoves out, because they have a huge impact in terms of global warming, but in terms of saving forests and human health and a variety of other things. There's a lot of other directions we could have taken the conversation to address the problems of sustainability and ways that you can engage it in a green and productive way, and we did it. To answer the question about why do we focus so much on buildings, at least, you know, we have an American-focused group here, and here in the United States, some 40% of all of our energy is consumed in buildings, and so, or by buildings, and so if you can figure out ways to address that particular issue, you have solved a significant chunk of the overall problem, partly because the United States is such a huge consumer of electricity, so its 40% actually matters when you scale it up across the world. But we could have and probably should have talked about a whole wide range of other issues: water, you know, international relations, the oceans, you know, fishing. There's all kinds of things we could have brought this to, and we didn't. But we only had an hour and a half, and so we are over time. I wanted to thank all of you for being such a wonderful audience and asking a lot of questions. And then let's have one final round of applause for our panelists.